Well, hello, everybody. We are very thankful that you are taking the time to listen to this video as we had promised. Well, not promised, but we had stated Friday, a few days ago, that we were going to make a video concerning racism in our nation. And as you have seen, if so, many of you have seen from the picture I've shown, our family, we have a interracial family here. And we thought we could help in offering at least our own experience and the things that we've discovered along the way. My wife and I have been married for 16 years now, almost, in about, 2 weeks? 2 weeks now. And that being the case, we have had many discussions over the years talking about race in America and just racism in general, of course. And we've had many disagreements. We've had many points that we've agreed upon. But I think the goal is, and the point is, that over the years, she and I have really helped each other to get a more accurate focus on the topic and how it is relevant and real in American society, particularly since that is where we live. And so that what spurred the video, of course, is basically the most recent event would have been the death of George Floyd up in Minneapolis. George Floyd's death, which of course led to the subsequent protesting and the rioting and looting as well. And I had it in mind to write my thoughts concerning the idea of not necessarily the protesting, but the rioting and looting with respect to the death of George Floyd and the concept of justice. And in the process of preparing to write for that, I said, you know what, let me just go ahead and make a video instead. That'd be a lot easier for me to express my thoughts that way. Plus, I have my own YouTube channel in which I do that anyway. Plug. And and so it's just easier for me to do that. So I thought I'd just go ahead and make a video, and my wife decided to go ahead and agree to do that too. So my name is Steve. Many of you know me already. And my wife here, Kim.
Hello.
And so we'll just go by Kim and Steve for now. And so that's kind of the why of the video. We really want to make a video here, folks, that helps. That's the goal of this. We want to help people out. We see it all the time. I have friends and family members, people on social media, and it's obvious that this is a topic, a relevant topic, a topic that is frequented in social circles. And we wanted to do our best to help the situation. So that's the goal of this video, is concerning that topic, is to bring help, to bring insight that we can offer. Perhaps we don't claim to be the standard of how to measure out everything in this topic, not at all. But what we do have is valuable, and it is because we are individuals as well as everybody else who is living through this and is living and dealing with this experience and this subject, as we live in a society that is multi-ethnic and so forth. So let's just go ahead and kind of give our background here so everyone knows kind of where we're coming from. Kim, do you want to introduce, kind of give your backdrop first? Or
I just want to say that for me, doing this video, and this is a big step for me because anybody who knows me knows that I'm an introvert and I like to.
Yes.
And I like to be in the background, but since Steve asked me to do this,
And introverts are cool. They're cool. I have no problem. I like introverts. I got plenty of friends that are introverts, so make that clear.
I reluctantly agreed to do the video, and but not be seen on camera since this will be on YouTube, and I want to remain anonymous as much as I can.
Right, as much as you can.
People who know me know what I look like if you see this on Facebook. But anyway, so I think we can both say that we want people to come together and to really hear each other and listen to what the other side is saying without saying, but what about this? But what about this? At least for me, you know, if somebody who wants to be heard doesn't really want to be contradicted with every point that they're trying to make to you.
Right.
And everybody's experience is different, and I think we should listen when people want to tell their own personal stories, no matter what side you're on.
Yep.
And of of course, this is not some comprehensive discussion about race. We're just kind of giving our own experiences based on what we lived through and maybe what we've heard other people close to us say about their experiences. So anyway, I guess we could talk about how we grew up, a little bit about our backgrounds, like you were saying.
Yeah. Okay.
So you want to go first, or?
Sure.
Okay.
I'll go first. So, I was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. That's where I was born 40 years ago. So there you go, y'all. You have my age. And so 40 years ago, I was born in Philadelphia, PA. And that's where my family, all of us came back there. My mom and dad, both their families, all of us came back from the East over there. And I grew up and lived in Philadelphia until the age of, right before I turned 8, about a couple weeks before I turned 8 years old. Then we lived in Kansas City, Missouri, which is a great town as well. And we were there for about 7 years. When we were in Kansas City, my parents divorced while I lived there. And so my dad, at that point, had moved down to Houston. That was in 1992, I believe he moved to Houston. And then I stayed in Kansas City. And then after that, about a couple years later, I moved down. I think it was 94. I moved down to Texas, and I've been in Texas since, minus 2 years, where I did spend in Virginia from '04 to '06, roughly in there. And but yeah, those are basically where I grew up. In Philadelphia, about 8 years. Kansas City, about 7 years. In Texas, the remainder of my life for the most part. And growing up, I remember I never really had any big issues with when it came to ethnicity or interracial relations. In my family, at least, I never really was exposed to any obvious racial behavior that I noticed, at least. If it was because I was an ignorant child and did not pick up perhaps on someone's speech and did not recognize what they were saying. But from what I can tell and what I can observe, and just looking back in the past, I don't really recall having, especially my parents, I will say that my parents never would put up with any kind of racist or unjust statements about people who weren't white. And speaking of that, I would be what people would typically call a white man. That's what I would be identified as in our culture. And but yeah, my parents never reinforced that. They actually enforced the idea of accepting people for who they are, not because of any skin color. You don't devalue them because of things that they cannot change. My mother, I think, had a lot of interactions when she was young with black women, and I know she had black friends. My dad, when I was a young boy, he taught at a high school that was, I believe, mostly a black high school, mostly black attendance as far as the students there, and they never really, I never got the impression from my parents whatsoever that black people were any different in value or the way we ought to treat them than white people. Granted, my family, though, we were white people in my family. There were no interracial relationships in my family that I was aware of, at least.
The areas you grew up in, what did that look like as far as race?
Race, Philadelphia, definitely a mixed community of people there. In my neighborhood, I want to say it was mostly white, but there was never, I don't ever having an idea of us being isolated. I went to a school that was not isolated, was not, just a white school, as it were. There were other, children there from other ethnicities as well. Of course, you're talking about pretty vague memories at this point, so it's kind of hard to, correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's kind of hard to really get a clear image, just kind of drawn off the vague memories of what I have, because like I said, I was there until right before I was 8. So you can imagine my memories aren't just super sharp.
Okay.
But
in
Missouri, that was pretty much the same as far as I went to school there. Mostly white kids, I would say, in the community. We lived in a suburb of Kansas City. Liberty, Missouri. Many of you may know of Liberty. Great town, by the way. Has grown tremendously since I've lived there. But still a good town. Nice folks up there. In where I went there was, still a minority representative, I guess you would say, of black students. I really don't recall many Latino students at all. But I had black friends there. Mike Flores and Namika Dejan, just to remember. Actually remember their names, some of them. And that'd be interesting if they actually heard this. But yeah, again, same idea though. I never was the kind that would seek to mistreat people. I was always a really friendly kid when I was young. I usually, I wasn't like super popular, but I wasn't like disliked either. I was kind of like one of the middle guys, if you would.
Yeah.
And I was usually friends with anybody who was wanting to be friends with me. I would be friends with them. I had no real preference on the way a kid looked. And I never was exposed, again, or conditioned, as far as I can recall, to treat certain people certain ways. It was just, I mean, I remember with the white kids, they treated white kids badly. They called them names. They made fun of them. I mean, that was all around. And so we got to see that. And I never really noticed anything happening because somebody was black or another race. It was just because the kid was like small, or they just made fun of them. They just, they would make fun of them because of some dumb reason. It had nothing to do with their skin or their external
Kids being
kids. But yeah, you could just say that. Right. Immaturity at work. And then I come to Texas. Texas was definitely a big change up. Went to Cedar Hill. Ethnic mix up there, much different. Now it was much more exposure to, I'd say, the black community and Latino. But I will say I wholly accepted and embraced it, though. I
can see that.
Well, look who I married. But no, I really embraced it, though, and I really enjoyed that aspect of it, because I just, I said, I'm being exposed to so many more people now that don't look like me, but you know what? I mean, they are just like me in the sense that they're people. They laugh with you. They can be mean. They can be super friendly. They can do favors for you. They can be your best friend. They can do well in school, and they can do everything I can do. And so that was no issue, and I really enjoyed it. Mm-hmm. I would actually say I probably gravitated towards having possibly more black friends than white friends when I was in Cedar Hill.
Yeah, it was a black guy who introduced us.
That's correct. Yes, Thomas Garnett.
We're going to be looking him up.
Well, I've made that known on there before.
Yeah, that's
but anyways,
true.
so that's nothing secret. Mm-hmm. And I don't think he's ashamed of that. But either way, yeah, good guy. I've missed him. I haven't talked to him for a long, long time. But I've seen him though. And so where was I? Yeah, Cedar Hill was a good time. I had a great time and enjoyed being down in this in Dallas since. And just trying to think anything more to say about that. I mean, even my favorite genre of music of all time, folks, is 90s R&B. I'm serious. It's just like, I love it. That's my favorite. And so that grew on me really when I came down here. So anyways, there you go. I could say more, but we just want to keep it rolling for now. Okay. So what about you? What about your background?
My background is, where can I start? I grew up, I was not around white people at all growing up. I don't think the only white people I saw were teachers in school and on TV, basically. And if you have any questions, you can ask me. So I think my first exposure to being around people who were not black was probably in junior high school. And I went to a science academy, and it was kind of a more diverse group there. But there were still a lot of black people there, and I felt kind of like a comfort knowing that I had people there that looked like me there. And high school was mostly black people there. And I think the first time I felt like I was the only black person around other white people, and I was the only black person there, was when I started going to worship with you. Oh, it was probably the first time. And I'm just trying to think about how I felt at the time. It was probably kind of awkward, if I'm being honest. I felt like, this is different. How are people going to be looking at us and looking at me, and how are they going to treat me? But I don't remember feeling like I was mistreated or nobody was was overtly mean to me. If they had any thoughts about me negatively, they would keep it to themselves, you know. So, yeah, that's all I can really
That's
think
okay.
of. I know my story's a lot shorter than yours.
Well, I
but
talk
of
much
course,
more
yeah,
introvert. Remember?
definitely. I try to say as much as I can in as few words as possible. So.
Yeah, and let me add to what you just said about my story is that when I came down here, I will say this, that when I came down and I said I was much more exposed to the Black and Latino community, and when I went to high school in Cedar Hill, I too felt like I was as much accepted by them as I was people in the white community. There was no, hey, you're not one of us, you can't be friends with it. It was not like that. Of course, were there some amongst them? Sure. There were some white people as well that treated me terribly and were people not worth spending your time with because they just had problems. They were just unfriendly people, unfriendly kids, and so that went on both sides. So yeah, just wanted to mention that as well. As far as how I perceived them, I felt like as well I was accepted by them and not just rejected or something like that. No,
Right.
not at all. So. But what was it like? Let me ask you this: when you were younger and you said you weren't really exposed to many interactions with, white individuals, did that ever even come across your mind in any way at all? Or do you just say, I'm just conducting my day-to-day business and it is what it is?
And I didn't think about it really.
Yeah.
I was just, this is my life and what it is. I didn't think negatively about white people. I just probably didn't think about it at all because that just wasn't a part of my life really.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I guess what we want to say is putting out some foundation things, because, we're going to definitely have to make more than one video here. This is going to be it's going to be an enormously long video.
Yeah.
And we got things to do today. So besides this, I think it'd be good, of course, to lay down some principal things up front, some foundation things to lay down the goals of what we're trying to get at. That way, anything we say along the way, if it's understood incorrectly, if you take it the wrong way, you can at least fall back and say, well, here's what they're aiming at. So whatever Kim or Steve is saying, whatever they intend or whatever they mean by that, they're trying to establish this foundation. So have that in mind, folks. I think that will help us all to keep the focus here throughout this video and throughout any dialogue, is that you lay down your goals, you lay down what we're aiming at, and when we agree on those goals, that will help us in understanding what each other says. Were you about to say something? You look like you were going to say something. Okay.
No.
Okay.
Just if you have any questions or if you don't understand something that we're trying to say, I guess they can inbox you or
yes.
this is going to be on
you can
YouTube.
Put in you can YouTube
message or a comment under the video and
comment the video, or if those of us who know us on social media, you can send us a private message. That would be fine as well. And of course, all those communications will be anonymous. We have no intention of revealing any of the communication we receive from any of you for everyone to know, as far as the personal aspect of it. So I think what's good up front would be to point out, first of all, is the idea of justice. Everybody, one of the big claims of racism in America and like Black Lives Matter and all of the protesting and all is people want justice. Would you say that's fair? They want equality. They want equal treatment in the eyes of the law. They want to have a nation wherein they can live and feel like, hey, we're valued the same by the general community as well as those who are the authorities in our society. Right? Is that a fair way to put that?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, and hopefully everybody on both sides, that's something that we can all agree on and kind of look at that as a goal that we're all trying to get to. And as far as how to get there, we may have different ideas about that, but hopefully we all share that common goal at least. Right.
I agree with that 100%. And that's what we want, is we want equality, and everybody should want equality. If you don't want equality, then this video is not for you, because that's not what we're aiming for. We're actually working against the things that would lead to inequality. We're trying to work against that and resist those efforts in our culture and resist those mindsets and teach and instruct and help correct those things through kindness, through sincere compassion and understanding towards others, because we're all human beings. We all live on the same planet. We got to live in society together. And so we have to try to find ways. We have to live amongst each other, but we don't necessarily have to all believe and entertain ourselves with the same things. So we have to work that out. And so here's some things I wanted to point out up front as far as justice. Now, of course, not everyone who is listening or watching, if you would, believes in the Bible, and that's fine. This is not necessarily a video for Christians only or people who believe in the Bible only. That's not what it's for. It's for anybody who has a pulse, to say, if you want to put it that way. It's for anybody who's living and breathing, particularly in America, but for anyone around the world, really. This is because this goes for not just the United States. This is on a level of humanity that we're trying to address. And so I want to bring up just a couple of things here. If you look on the screen, I wanted to bring up a couple things here from the scriptures just to show a foundation here. In Deuteronomy chapter 32, here is Moses getting ready to lead the children of Israel. Well, he's not going to lead them. He's getting ready to die, actually, in the near future. But they're at the brink of entering into the promised land in the land of Moab. And Moses is reminding these children of Israel, they had been out of Egypt now for 40 years. And it's the next generation now. The parents had died. The parents who left Egypt had died. And they're coming into the promised land, getting ready to go in. And Moses is reminding them of that law that God gave them 40 years ago to their parents particularly. And he tells them in verse 32, or Deuteronomy 32 rather, what's going to happen to them in the latter days of that nation. Once they go into the land and generations down, they are going to, Moses is about to tell them what's going to happen. And in the process of telling them what's going to be happening to them in their future, he says in Deuteronomy 32 and verse 4, speaking of God, he says, he, that is God, he is the rock. His work is perfect, for all his ways are what? They're justice. A God of truth and without injustice. Righteous and upright is he. God is the source of justice. God is the source of what is right. That's the idea of righteous. What is right, what is upright, what is just. He is the foundation for those things. And as we talk about these issues, when we look at racism, we look at inequality, we look at injustice, we have to have some sort of concept of what justice really is, or else the whole dialogue, the whole discussion is going to be relative and will have no grounding whatsoever. And it will only lead to continuous confusion, misunderstanding, and further yelling and fighting and all that. That's what's going to happen. We have to find an understanding of what justice is. And God is the source of that justice. If you look at Psalm 7, look at verse 11, very similar statement addressing the idea of justice, where it says here, God is a just judge. You see that? And God is angry with the wicked every day. So when God makes judgments, judging, he does them justly, fairly. He doesn't take in mind things that would be considered an unfair judgment. He looks at everyone equally, and we'll see that here later on. Matthew 23, verse 23, I think Jesus here makes a statement that's very critical in the importance of justice. In the idea of describing the weightier matters of the law, Jesus points out that one of those weightier matters is justice. So justice in Jesus' mind was a weighty issue. So that means if there's injustice going on, that's a serious, serious problem. It's not something that we should just push to the back and deal with that later. Injustice is a very serious concept, and it needs to be addressed. More so than, say, other things, which need to be defined, of course. But it is a weightier matter, no doubt, and so forth. And even Prophet Amos would even say in Amos 5 to let justice run down like water. It would be something that God desires. God wants justice. God wants that in the land. Now, at the same time, did you want to say something about any of this at this point? You good?
No, I mean, I think that's good that you brought that up as a good foundation. Mm-hmm. Like if you're wondering about justice or wondering about, I don't know if you're about to mention attitude.
Oh, you're good.
And all that the Bible, as far as, like you said, not everybody is going to be a Christian that's listening to this.
Correct.
But for us, this is our foundation. This is where we go to if we're wondering what is justice or how should I behave in this circumstance. We'll go back to the scriptures that's where our foundation is. So.
Correct. Right. And so that's where we're coming from when it comes to the idea of justice. And even if you look at the gospel, and how God saves people from their sins, you look in here in Acts 15, it says when Cornelius and the household of the Gentiles in Acts chapter 10, when they were saved by the gospel, and they saved by the hearing of the words of faith, and when they obeyed that gospel message that Peter brought to them, and that announcement was brought back to the church in Jerusalem, the statement was made here that God had purified their hearts, that is, the hearts of Cornelius and the Gentiles, and in doing so, he made no distinction between us, that is the Jews, and them, the Gentiles. And the point is, here's God's justice. God says it doesn't matter what your race is or what your ethnicity. If you're a Jew or a Gentile, it does not matter. If you want to be right with me, every single person has to do the exact same thing. And folks, that's the essence of justice and fairness. Everybody's being treated the same here. You have all the people in the world have all their different issues and all their different things that they deal with in their lives on a day-to-day basis, but everybody has to do the same thing if they want to be on good terms with God. That's the idea of justice. He's treating everybody fairly right there on that. And so, having that said, I think it's also important to make one more point, that God is also the one who institutes civil authorities into the land. If you see passages, and we won't necessarily go there, but Romans 13, 1 Peter chapter 2, and so forth, other things could be mentioned, but just for the sake of time, God is the one who installed civil government, civil authorities into society. And the purpose of it was to help to create and establish order, and particularly to punish evil and to reward those who do good. And the governing authorities are supposed to be ruling on the basis of God's idea of justice. And when civil governments and authorities do not rule on that basis, they are acting out of line with God. And God has shown in the Bible that in time, civil authorities of governments who continue to pursue unjust treatment of the citizens will eventually be judged by God. And God will bring his wrath upon that government, upon that nation of people. And there will be a changing of what the Bible call changing of the heavens and the earth, if you want to bring that up. But that's another topic. So making that clear, we want to make that point that we recognize that the governing authorities in and of itself is a righteous idea. There's supposed to be government. In any free society where truly freedom reigns and there is true freedom, you are going to have laws. You're going to have people who enforce the law, because in a free society, people are allowed to choose to be immoral. They are allowed to have the choice to be mean, to hate somebody because of their color of their skin. That's part of being free. What you cannot do, though, is you cannot violate the rights of someone else because you feel a certain way. You're not allowed to do that, because that person has the freedom to live, to have liberty, yes, and to pursue happiness. The Declaration making that right, making that clear, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those essential foundations are protected by the government, and you can act on those things so far as you don't infringe on others' exercise of those very same things. That's the point. And men just don't. I think everybody would agree. If you look over history, men just don't tend to behave themselves. And that's why you need, and God in his wisdom installed governing authorities to help reinforce and protect the innocent of society, to ensure that people can establish, or can exercise rather, those freedoms and those liberties. And when those things are not going on, that's when it is time for government to step in and say, there's a problem and this needs to be fixed, because justice is not being preserved. And the government's job is there to protect it and preserve it for those, for the citizens of that society. So anyways, making that clear, is there any comment you had to say on this point? At this point?
No, that's just,
What's that?
I just think that's amazing for people like you that can do that. Just the
Do
way
what?
that you can just talk and talk and talk and talk.
Yeah, well.
Like, I can't think of that many words to say about that subject without thinking about it for a long time. But yeah, I agree.
Well,
though,
that's only
totally
because.
with it,
Oh, go ahead.
with what you were saying.
Well, that's probably because I've said a lot about it before, so I'm probably just having previous ideas pop in my head as I'm boiling or letting it brew or simmer in my marinate. But okay, so let's look here. What were we going to talk about here? Just a few things. Again, this video is going to be primarily just platform, foundation, getting some things showing off the top. Okay, number one, I think this is a very good point. What did you have a point you'd rather bring up instead? Because I was going to bring up this right here, and I think this would be good about the bitterness. And I think that's something we can address. Folks, one thing I think should be really addressed in all this is that if our hearts, this is a heart issue. I mean, the outward expression of racism is really just rooted in a problem in the heart. Mark 7 makes that very clear, but I don't want to turn this into a Bible study. That's not the focus, and not saying that's irrelevant, because the Bible is absolutely essential in all these things, but we don't want to turn this into necessarily a Bible study. That's my goal here. So looking at, what I was saying up front here, this first point is the idea of bitterness.
That kind of goes along with what I had here about having the right attitude.
Right. Folks, okay. One thing is, if we're going, because, you look at all, lately with all this stuff with George Floyd, and you look at the comments of the protesters on their little signs that they're holding up and things like that. One of the things I've seen repeatedly is people saying things like, well, enough talk, it's enough time, it's time that we've stopped talking about this and doing something. Well, I agree. It doesn't, what good does it do to hold up signs or to say something on social media and then just go back to bed at night and get up the next day and continue acting the same way you were before? That really doesn't promote much results.
Yeah, you're saying without individually changing?
Right.
What you're talking about?
Right,
okay.
Yeah, exactly. And
because talking is not bad, of course.
no, I agree. Talking is absolutely essential. We have to get the message out, and that's good. But simply talking and if that leads to no action, meaning that nobody's changing anything, yes, that's the idea what I meant by that. Then yeah, it does no good. It's just empty and vain words. Oh, I love you, while I just beat you down in the street,
Right.
Like, okay, yeah, I got you, buddy. Good, tough love, right? Okay. So yeah, the idea, folks, is bitterness. Bitterness and prejudice, they have to be put on the sideline. You have to bench those ideas, or else this discussion will get nowhere.
Yeah.
I say that again. Oh, I'm sorry.
I was
It will get nowhere. Absolutely nowhere. If you have a bitter attitude, and if you have a prejudice attitude, prejudge, you know what that means? Prejudging, that's the idea of prejudice. You're judging something before you find out the facts, before you find out before you investigate and find out data about the person. Let's say you already prejudge them as what? As racist, or they are not going to like me, or they won't hear anything I have to say. You can't do that.
Right.
Go ahead.
That's kind of what I was saying. Like when you're talking to someone, not to just assume the worst about what they're saying. Like if it can be viewed in two different ways, like maybe try to look at it like they mean it in the best way, especially if it's somebody that you know and you've been around them a long time, and you should know that they don't have any ill will toward you, that whatever they're saying to you is maybe just to try to get some understanding about where you're coming from. Just try to look at things from the other person's point of view without in your mind saying to yourself, how can I counter what they're saying? Like if somebody, I'm trying to think of an example.
What's that?
Of like if somebody
Go ahead.
saying something maybe about an experience. We're talking about police brutality and all that. If they're talking about an experience they had with the police officer, and then you counter that with, well, these stats over here say this, and this.
Right.
You're kind of minimizing what they're saying, and you're kind of saying to them, I'm not listening to your story.
Right. Right.
So.
Yeah, and I agree with that 100%. And I see that sometimes, and I've noticed that like on social media. For example, let's go to a non-related. Let's go to a issue that is not concerning racism so you can kind of get the point a little better here. For example, it's like somebody saying, someone puts up a post about God being a God who is just and a God who is one who exercises righteous indignation. And it says, the Bible even says God's a consuming fire. And someone says, yeah, but God's also a God of love and a God of forgiveness and grace. Well, yeah, that's true. And that's not an exclusive statement that's being said originally. It's just emphasizing or pointing out for the sake of that moment, I'm noticing this, I'm focusing attention, drawing attention to this issue or to this particular aspect. It's not a negation of other ones. It's just simply saying I'm focusing my eyes or my mental perspective on this at the moment. And the fact if you, have to come on and always counter somebody's comment, that's not that is not inherently an exclusive one. Well, what's the, why when you do something like that, someone may look at that and say, well, man, you're kind of drowning out what I'm trying to hold up. You're almost like obscuring their goal at that point.
It's like you're not hearing me. You're not hearing what I'm saying.
Right. And you're wanting them to hear you now and say, no, but listen, here's the truth. It's like, well, you can't, sometimes people don't have ill motives when they point something out that's specific. That's not necessarily a bad thing to do. And so, again, so having the right attitude, and this is going to come up repeatedly, of course, the attitude issue. You have to have the right attitude. You can't let bitterness in your heart consume you. Because, folks, and I've said this before, if you have a bitter spirit and if you don't do anything to rid that of you, it's going to eat you alive. And you are going to become a sour person. And people are going to see that. And people are going to stay away from you because they're going to say, every time I'm around that person, they have nothing good to say. They don't have much to say to me at all. They can come across as even impolite, perhaps, if they're really, really sour or bitter. But that's what happens when those things are trapped in your heart and you don't rid them out of your heart. You have to get that out. Acknowledge that it's there and get it out of there. Don't be afraid to acknowledge that. I have much respect for a person who says, man, I'm having problems. I feel this way and I hate the way I feel. I need to do something to fix this. Man, come on, let's get it going. Yeah, I'm with you, man. I'll throw my arm around your shoulder. Let's go do this, But just to sit there and let it harbor in there and grow and take root and it's going to be worse and worse and worse to get out. And it turns you into an ugly, ugly person. You can't let that happen. You can't let those things stay inside of you. Now, let's talk about for a moment the idea of prejudice versus naivety. Remember I was talking about that yesterday? You don't want to be prejudiced and just assuming, reading into things, things that were there that are not there. You can't do that because you don't have a right to do that. You can't prejudge. Well, the reason a black man that I spoke to the other day, let's say at the gas station, the reason he didn't say anything back is because I'm white.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know that.
Assumption off just one interaction.
Just because,
with someone you never met before.
Right. You can't just look down and say, well, and even if you say, well, probably because I'm white. Well, hold on, whoa, hold up now. You can't do that, man. You don't know that person.
Right.
You don't know them, and so let it go and just have a good day. Is that person interfering with your day at that point, or can you just brush it off and go about your business? Because there could be good reasons that person is not didn't respond. Maybe they didn't hear what you said. Maybe they thought you were talking to someone else in the room.
Or they just got fired from their job.
Or maybe they're trying to reach out to another white man who is racist and won't hear them, and they're wondering in their head, how can I talk to this other guy? And they didn't hear you because they're busy focusing how to help someone else. You don't know that. That's prejudging. You prejudice. You can't do that.
Yeah, that's happened. Actually, kind of happened to me before a little bit. I worked at a job. I won't say which place, but there was someone I knew there, and later on, me and this guy, we became friendly at work and all that. But he said, yeah, when I first met you, I said hi to you, and you didn't speak to me. But he didn't realize that I didn't hear him. But at the time, he thought that I was some arrogant, uppity person,
Wow.
So that's...
Okay, go ahead.
Well, So anyway, that's just an example. And I'm sure I've done that
right.
to people before, too.
Yeah, I'm sure I've come across like that to folks, and I hope I don't. I will hope that if people think that I might be racist, I would hope that they would just ask me. Now, I understand that, people are not going to just come to someone, just tap on the shoulder, hey, sir, I think you might be racist. Some people will do that. But I would hope that if people see me, they would not just think the worst of me, especially if they don't even know who I am. Mm-hmm. And what's sad to say is I've known people who do know me and who have thought the worst, and I had no intention whatsoever to say anything. Nothing what I said was directed at it was like 180 degrees. And I thought to myself, why would they think that I was talking like that? Yeah. And it bothered me. Mm-hmm. I'm like, I like this person. We've had a good history together. Why would they think I'm doing like this now? I've never shown them like this before. And I'm confused. It confuses me. And I'm like, why would people think like that? And, that doesn't mean that I'm totally free. And what I mean by that is I could have said something that could have been worded better. I agree. Yes, sure. So
and
we
that's
have
good. You would look at yourself too and say, what could I have done?
Right.
To maybe influence them to think this way.
Right.
Not that you did, but at least you were kind of did some introspection. And
right.
Try to think, well, maybe I said something.
Right. But kind of what you said a moment ago about the counterpoint thing. Mm-hmm. Let's say you do have a response. Let's someone is saying something incorrectly, and you're putting up other information that is true. Let's say it's true, but every time they say something, you just throwing it back. Well, that can come across, like we already said, that can come across in a sour way, like you're not hearing them. Mm-hmm. And you're like, well, I'm saying the truth. I'm saying what I'm saying is right. And it may be right. Mm-hmm. But is that what you say?
Kind of being dismissive of what they're trying to talk to you about. If they see you continuously doing that, mm-hmm.
Right. So on the other side of prejudice, there's the idea of naivety, and that is we can't be so, if there is racism going on, when I say if there is racism going on, I'm being careful when I say it. I'm just saying in hypothetical. That's why I said like that in the case of a certain case. But if someone brings up something to you, and in that story, or you see something, let's say that's pretty obvious, like let's say you watch something on TV and someone calls somebody a racial slur, and they're obviously mistreating this person in accord with what that racial slur is, and you see, contradicting, or not contradicting necessarily, but what's the word we're looking for? You look for basically unjust treatment in the sense that they treat others a different way, but this guy is called a racial slur and he's treated differently. You're like, well, I don't know. There could be a reason why he did that. Okay, so that's where it gets. I guess I'm getting down to the point. You get to the point where we're sticking our head in the sand. It's like, okay, man, how much evidence do you need that there is racism going on here? Come on, man. I mean, so you can't be like that either. And that will be the other end of the spectrum from prejudice. Assuming before you even see anything or hear any evidence, you just start off the person's a default racist until no, you can't do that. And then you have, well, all the evidence is brought in and it says, but still they're not racist. Well, that's the other end. You can't do that either, folks. We have to make sure that we are not approaching this issue being naive or being prejudiced. And sometimes it's hard to find that middle ground. I get that. But that takes practice. You have to make effort to try to find a way. Just like when I said in the beginning, my wife and I have talked about these issues for years. I don't talk now like I was at the beginning. I've had my ideas have been sharpened up, I think, a little bit. They've been hewn down to where they can focus in more on the exact matter. And so, just making sure that we understand that there is a difference between or we have to find a balance rather between being prejudiced and being naive. Okay. I got to move.
I'll just say quickly that and vice versa, I can understand things more from your point of view as well. Like we understand each other and where we're coming from better. Like was something we were talking about the other day where I didn't understand what you were saying. You remember I forgot what we were talking about, but I was thinking you were saying one thing, but you were trying to explain to me something else, and it took us a while, but we finally got to a point.
Oh, that was the Black Lives Matter thing, them in the street and all that. Remember?
Okay. I forget. But yeah. But anyway, the point is we talked about it until we got an understanding of what we were saying to each other. without getting upset and
Right.
having bitter attitudes and all that. So
Okay. All right. Let's see here. One more thing I want to look at. Let's just move on to the next thing. Rather, is the idea, folks, that as we talk about this matter, change takes time. Change takes time. I mean, if you're looking to wake up tomorrow morning and see a society that's just free of this and that, well, you are in for a lost cause, and you're in for a rude awakening, as I put it, because it's just not going to happen. We're talking about human behavior here. These are not things that people would just normally, oh, I don't do that. That's not how I really believe and live and feel. And just all of a sudden in the moment, I just act like a racist and then go back to being a pursuing justice in society the next moment. People aren't like that. As I said ago, with like the things with Officer Chauvin, whatever his name is, the people who excuse me, people who to riot as far as burning down buildings, shooting people in the streets. The officers like Chauvin who put their knee on someone's head or neck rather, for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And like, I believe it's 2 minutes and 53 seconds after he was unresponsive as well, just continuing to kneel. That kind of thing is something that comes out from the inside. That is something that has been in the person's mind and in their heart and is just expressing itself. Those things, those behaviors, folks, those heart conditions, if you would, those things take time to change. And we have to allow time to take its course if we're going to see the change and the hope to see the change that we all want.
that's true, because
Go ahead.
when I was talking at the beginning of this about how awkward I felt when we first started dating and we were going to worship together and I was the only black person there, that awkwardness that I felt then, I don't have that anymore if I'm in that same situation. And it just took me being around different types of people and getting to know people in other cultures and things like that. And then finally, I got to a point gradually where I'm really comfortable around most people that I meet for the first time.
And that's wonderful. That's good to hear that.
It took some time, like you were saying.
Yeah, it does take time. So like, if you're like, hey, you know what? We're going to see some change in society, and you have like a good evening where you're, you have a good conversation with people and you have a good dialogue, or you hear this video here. And then, tomorrow you go out and you go to the store and somebody treats you there in a way that could very likely be, racially motivated. You can't just throw up your hands like, oh, this is not working. Our society is not going to ever change. It's not going to happen like that. It's not going to happen like that. Everybody who's trained a child should know that behavior doesn't happen. You tell your kid something, it's not like all of a sudden that's supposed to be a snap of my finger. There we go. It's not like all of a sudden the kids just got it down and you can move on to the next thing in life. It takes time. Some kids, like me, were very hard-headed and almost never learned anything and had to be constantly reminded until they moved out of the house to go get married.
And then people
to
like
do
me
things.
were perfect from the beginning and didn't.
Yeah, that's right. 2 peas in a pod. Yeah, right. Sure. It's not going to happen right away. And I think that's something as a little graphic here is very helpful. I heard this some years back when I was in school, and I thought it was very helpful because it does express a general idea of how people tend to learn things when it comes to behavior. And so it's basically a competency-incompetency learning process. And if you look here and you'll see, this is like the starting point. This is the behavior pattern that needs to be changed, or the person is desiring to change. And they're in a state of unconscious incompetence, which basically means, as it says here, you're unaware that you are doing what you're doing, and that you're not doing what you're desiring to do. In other words, as it says here, your lack of proficiency. You're not good at behaving a certain way, and you're not even aware that you're not good at behaving a certain way. And so what happens is you have to be brought to mind. It has to be brought to your mind that you are doing something that needs to be changed, right? Or let's say you want to learn and how to change this. And so now the first thing it has to do is it has to be brought to your conscious. You have to give conscious attention to it. And when that happens, you are at the state of conscious incompetence, meaning you're still behaving the same way you were, but you're just aware of the fact that this is not how I should be behaving or not how I want to behave. And you have to have constant reminders, by the way, of being conscious. If you don't have those external stimuli that remind you and keep you conscious, you'll fall right back into this again, because the underlying incompetence is there all this time. And so you need things to remind you. Now, when you take conscious competence and add effort to it, you roll over into conscious competence, which is saying that you're still needing those external things. You still need to be reminded, hey, you need to brush your teeth. When you tell, okay, it's time to go brush your teeth. It's time to take your bath. Those are the conscious reminders, putting it at the front of the mind. And eventually the person will start learning how to do the behavior correctly. And that is, they usually are, it's good to demonstrate for the person, here's how you need to do this. Give them things to do, practices, tools that they can use, and remind them. And that will lead them to develop a conscious, competent state. And they do this enough, and they graduate into the goal, which is the unconscious competence, meaning that they will continue to do the desired behavior pattern, but they'll no longer need the external stimuli. They'll no longer need to be reminded. You know, I'm 40 years old now. I don't need my mother to call me up at night and tell me it's time to go brush my teeth. I have my wife to do that now. I'm able to do those things now with my mind on other things while I am doing them. And that is the state when you have truly changed your behavior from this to this. And this here, folks, this here is a process that takes time. And the things that we are discussing concerning racism and equality and injustice and police brutality, we're looking at this right here, folks. We're looking at this. It's going to take time. And it's going to take people teaching, reminding, instructing, and it's also going to have to take people who are willing to change, who want to change, and who want to listen, who want to learn. If you throw out those elements, this whole thing will crumble, and there won't be any changing at all. So do realize that as we talk about these things, that change takes time. You look up, I was talking about the Bible a little bit ago. Judges chapter 2 and verse 10. Judges chapter 2 and verse 10 shows that within one generation, a people who knew of God totally disregarded God and became corrupt. It doesn't take very long as far as generation-wise. It can take one generation to significantly go down, go south, or you can turn things around significantly in one generation. And folks, I would say, and I think Kim might agree with me here, is that one of the greatest things we can do in this is to teach our kids.
Yeah, absolutely.
We got to teach. Yeah, we got to teach our young. This is, point out to this. They see this. They're going to see this stuff. So don't hide it from them. But the best thing to do is when they see it, to be there with them, so you can teach them in the moment as they take in what they're seeing and hearing. They can also get that cognitive input to attach to it and say, this is not how we're supposed to treat each other, or this is how we're supposed to treat one another. This is how we're going to make the society, make this world a better place, a fair place, a balanced place, things like that. But make sure we teach our children. Of course, we got to teach each other, but children is one of the greatest sources we can go to help turn this thing around. They can be the leaders, our future leaders, who really turn the tide, as it were, concerning this topic. Anything you got to say about that?
I just love seeing children together because they don't even think about things like that.
I know, right?
I just think about our daughter. I don't know if we won't say her name or not, but
no, okay.
But yeah, she gets along with everybody. I mean, it doesn't matter.
Right here, just looking at
the color of their skin, how old they are, how young, old, whatever color. She does not care. She'll go and she'll play with anybody and she'll talk to anyone. I just think that's beautiful. Yeah.
Yes.
That's a beautiful thing.
It's a very beautiful thing. And I want to preserve that in her. And Kim and I will defend her viciously from anyone who tries to take that from her.
We will do that.
Because that is like you said, it's a beautiful thing, and we want to preserve that in her. We want her to be an adult. That when she gets, into adulthood, she will recognize the value of that attitude, and that she too will defend it and promote it among others. And her actions, her behaviors will influence other people to do something, similar to that. And so, all right, what's next? Do you have on your list there any other thing?
I'm probably gonna have to wrap it up because I do have to go.
Okay. Okay.
But we can leave with a cliffhanger.
A cliffhanger.
The question that we will answer next time if you want to do that.
Okay. Did you want me to read it for you, or do you want to read? Do you want me to read it?
It doesn't matter.
Okay.
Me?
Okay. So we had asked questions, or asked our when I made an original post on social media, we had asked people who had seen the post to send any questions to us privately, of course, and we will keep the sender anonymous when we address them. And we had a few questions come in. And so we wanted to at least mention one because, at the time when we were getting people sending questions, we were still building how we were going to do all this. So that's why, we're looking at this now. We're going to have to make several videos, which is fine with me. And but we're feeling this out, and we're going to get to them. We have them on here. And but I wanted to at least bring up something to let you all know that we are going to be getting them. And so here's one that we will be addressing in the next one.
Yeah, in the next one. Mm-hmm. So this came from, did you want to say, not this person's name, but their demographic, like their...
Sure. This came from a person who would, as far as I know, would identify themselves as a white male. I mean, he is a man, and as far as I know, he might call himself white. So he's a white man, and I know this guy personally, and so go ahead. What have we got to go?
Okay, so the question is, it says, a lot of people are pushing the institutional systematic racism narrative talk about the fear blacks live in every day from police officers. Fear that they will be killed just for being black. As a black woman, did Kim live in this sort of fear growing up? Or was this fear felt 10 to 15 years ago? Does she live with such fear now? I'm not asking about a fear of getting pulled over or demeaned. I'm talking about a fear of being killed by a police officer merely for being black. That is the question.
Okay. And so you want to address that in the next video?
Yeah, because I do need to go.
Okay.
So.
And so we will be making more. I really enjoy doing this so far. And I'm really, really thankful that my lovely wife can be here and that we can do this together, because I hope that this will help, like I said, help y'all. Will help people who are watching and who are listening to maybe get, in any way you can add it to your skill level of how to address people and how to better influence our culture towards, fair treatment, equality, and, the purging of any racist behavior. Of course, and I'll just say this as we close, folks, let's just make one thing clear. Racism will never be totally exterminated. Just like any other mistreatment of human beings, it's not going to be totally gone. But that doesn't mean we can't do anything, though, to fix it and to minimize it. And I think we should do what we can to bring it to a low and to help run it out of here, because there's always going to be people in our society who choose to just be mean people, or to do evil, or to do bad things. Again, that's part of a free society. But we don't have to let that kind of thing continue. We don't have to let people go and go on and on without learning how they can overcome that. Mm-hmm. What were you gonna say?
No, I mean, I agree with that. And like you were saying, I think the best thing we can do is just teach our children, and also to just be around different kinds of people.
Yes.
That's definitely what helped me the most, because like I said earlier, I grew up and I was only around black people, in which, at the time that's fine. But what got me used to being comfortable around other people was just being around other people and getting to know them, and that's basically it.
Right. So in other words, don't isolate.
Right.
Do your best to intermingle.
And understand other people, listen to other people, hear what they're saying.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and we'll be talking more about these things in the next video as we can move forward. And of course, as we bring up topics like George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and we look at all these different, cases that are going on, these points that we're bringing up, these principles are probably going to be surfaced again as we apply them and show how, as we look at these cases, how we can exercise and address these things properly in a way that's fruitful for dialogue and for the better treatment of each other. So, okay.
Yep.
All right. We'll go ahead and stop here, folks. Join us again on the next video. I'll be letting people know. Again, I'll be posting this video on my wall, which is where you'll see this link coming from. And you can go on there and like, and if you want to like the page or whatever, get notifications that way. When we put up the next one, you'll be reminded that it's there. I really, really, again, we really want to help people out. Again, we don't claim to be, y'all coming to us and we'll show you, how to handle racism.
Our limited perspective.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. We are one of 30 million people in the United States.
Right.
Everybody's got a life that they are living and engaging in society. We're just one of those millions of people, but maybe we have something that others can find helpful. And that's what we want to at least put it out there for you to use if you find it helpful. So thank you so much for taking the time to listen. Again, if you have any questions, put them in the question box below the comment section, or you can, if you know us privately on social media, you can send us a private message and we'll bring those in and add those to our list. And so we'll address that question next week in our next video. Have a good night and take care. See you then.
Goodbye.